Rock of Dummase is one of Ireland's most spectacular and interesting castles. It's also linked to some very interesting and important historical figures. Perched on a small hill in Laois, it overlooks and dominates the surrounding area. Indeed, you can see far into the distance from its top. It is easy to see why a castle and previously a fort were built there. It commanded the surrounding areas and would have been difficult to take by surprise. It is now in ruins and has been so since the 16th century. Actually, despite its strategic position, for large parts of the 15th and 16th centuries it was unoccupied. Its ruins are beautiful, evocative, mysterious. Despite the damage inflicted by war, time and neglect, and by the owner of the land at the end of the 18th century, you can still get a very good idea of what the castle would have looked like in the past, and especially how the natural rock formations were taken advantage of and built into the castle. Dunamase is a very special place indeed. In this video, we will look at the castle and its history. While the castle itself seems to date back to the late 12th century, the hill, or the rock, was occupied much before this. As can be seen in its name, which contains the Irish word dún, found in so many place names. In Irish, its name is Dunamase, the Fort of Mask. This mask is said to be the grandson of Saya Sidfach, King of Leinster. While some argues that Dunamase appears on Ptolemy's 2nd century map of Ireland under the name of Dunum, this is pure speculation, as no archaeological evidence of this has been found. However, near the gatehouse, the remnants of a dry stone wall can be found. This is probably part of the pre-Norman construction. In addition, as Neil Jackman points out in his excellent guide to Dunamase, it is recorded in Irish annals that the fort was attacked by the Norse in 844, who managed to get inside and kill the abbot of Terryglass, who was taking refuge there. Let us now look at what remains of the castle. It's built around a rocky outcrop on top of a hill. Although it is in ruins, enough remains that it's possible to identify its various parts. In general terms, it consists of a keep and 3 other areas, called wards. An inner ward near the keep, a middle ward with a curtain wall and a twin-towered gatehouse, and an outer ward with a gatehouse and a triangular-shaped wall. As mentioned above, little seems to remain of any pre-normal constructions or fortifications. Indeed, this seems to consist of just the fragments of a wall. Presumably, the Gaelic fortifications were built over by the larger castle. Also absent are the traces of the initial Norman castle. It is probable that initially these would have been wooden. Although the hill was fortified in the 1170s, soon after the Norman invasion, and appears to have definitely existed as a castle by the 1180s, the present structure only seems to have been built somewhat later. According to the Historic Environment Viewer, the earliest part of the present castle is the keep. This seems to date from around 1220, though it may be as early as 1180. As might be expected, the castle seems to have been built in a number of stages. Also according to the Historic Environment Viewer, the initial defences consisted of the keep, which measures 19.8 metres east-west and 21.3 metres north-south, and the inner ward, which had a wall around it 1 metre thick and 2.2 metres high. These were built on top of the rocky outcrop. There may have been 3 towers on the wall of the inner ward, though only the foundations of one remain. Later, the middle ward and the outer ward were added, as well as a gatehouse, possibly in the 13th century. There was a gatehouse on the east side to enter the middle ward. Like the inner wall, there may have been a mural towel along the middle ward wall. The outer ward had a gatehouse on the southeast castle. Leading to it was a stone causeway crossing the deep ditch around this part of the castle. Apparently it was built later, as a drawbridge existed there previously. According to Leask, the keep was altered, possibly substantially, around 1600. This is interesting, as there are no records of the castle being used during the 9 Years' War. Moreover, in the second half of the 16th century, Fort Protector was built a few kilometres away. The town of Maryborough, which would eventually become Portlaoise, gradually grew up around this fort. During the 9 Years' War, this fort was of great importance and was often besieged by Hugh O'Neill's supporters, especially the forces of Eoghan MacMurrough O'Neill. Dunamase, on the other hand, was neglected. Perhaps people occupied it after the war. However, in the 17th century it was used for military purposes again. This would result in its destruction. Cromwellian troops are blamed for this, although the veracity of this is unsure. Indeed, in OPW excavations, modifications to the gatehouse were found which appear to have been made after the Cromwellian period. At present, the castle is entered through the Barbican Gate. A barbican is a fortified gateway. In Dunamase, it consisted of a triangular-shaped wall and gatehouse jutting out from the main gate and wall. Below it is a deep ditch. Probably there would have been a wooden palisade on top of this ditch, in addition to other earthworks. Based on the results of the excavations, the Barbican Gateway was probably built in the 13th century. As mentioned above, there was a drawbridge across a rock-cut ditch before the gateway was built. After passing through the Barbican, the next part of the castle was the inner Barbican area, where there would probably have been various houses and other structures. Next was what may be seen as the strongest part of the defences, the twin-towered main gatehouse and the curtain wall. The curtain wall would have run around the top of the hill, or slightly below it. Although the main gate is now badly ruined, excavations have revealed quite a bit about it. It was square-fronted. In other words, a square tower jutted out from the curtain walls. Arrow loops were found in the walls of the chambers overlooking the gate passage, while there was also a portcullis. However, there did not seem to be any type of drawbridge in this gateway. Evidence was found of fire in the passage and the chamber overlooking it on the east. Moreover, the portcullis and part of the gatehouse were also dismantled at some stage. As the Historic Environment Viewer states, quote, "It appears that there was a period of steady decay both before and after the main phase of dismantling the front of the tower." Added to this, an earlier gatehouse was revealed east of the present gatehouse. This measured 10 metres by 8 metres and had walls of between 1 and 3 metres tall. Initially, it appears that the upper floors would be wooden. It was modified afterwards. Finally, when the new gateway was built, this gate was blocked off and some defensive modifications added. The old gateway became part of the curtain wall, though the building remained in use, such as a smithy for a while. After passing through this gatehouse, the lower ward was entered. This area held buildings such as forges and workshops and housing for soldiers and perhaps servants and workers. Above this was the upper ward and the keep, which also held a great hall. When I visited, I could not help but think of the keep and hall in Maynooth Castle. It may have been contemporary with Dunamase, as was Trim Castle. The hall was built using limestone rubble and was quite large, measuring 35.5 metres by 20 metres, with the walls being up to 2.8 metres thick. Like Maynooth, in addition to the main hall and related rooms to service this, there was a private chamber in an upper floor. There was also a walkway on the roof level with steps up to this still existing. Indeed, when I visited, various adults, teenagers and younger children were having fun climbing up the walls. Bizarrely, this part of the castle was the subject of a failed restoration attempt in the late 18th century. Many alterations were made and damage done to this part of the castle, as it involved an attempt to build a banqueting hall in the keep. The culprit for this was Sir John Parnell, great-grandfather of Charles Stuart Parnell. Who would guess there was a link between Parnell and Dunamase? Between the end of the 18th century and the early 20th century, considerable damage was done all over Europe in the restoration, rebuilding, or romanticisation of European castles. The excavation work done in Dunamase seems to have focused more on the lower level of the castle, such as the Barbican and main gatehouse. I'm not sure how much work was done on the keep and banqueting hall. I hope some is done soon to properly identify how much damage Parnell did. It is perhaps fitting to return to the history of Dunamase now. We can only be glad that Parnell's project was a failure. If it had been successful, it would probably have turned these beautiful ruins into another Gothic or 19th century building pretending to be a castle. Fortunately, we are left with the largely medieval ruins. Though it's worth noting again that this building obliterated almost all traces of the Gaelic construction. Dunamase has a very rich history. While its pre-Norman past is largely obfuscated, with the exception of the 9th century Norse attack, we know much more about its later history. This involved figures such as Strongbow, William Marshal, Maud de Braose, Roger Mortimer, and at a later date, Eoghan Ruadh O'Neill. There's also much we do not know. In this, it is no different from most history. As mentioned above, Dunamase was a Gaelic castle in the early medieval period. Some claim it was the residence of the O'Moores. However, this seems to be inaccurate and depends on a backwards reading of late medieval and early modern history. It does seem to have been the base of Kettenig of Laois, who had some success against the Norse of Dublin in the 9th century. Kettenig's successors had less luck, and Laois basically fell under the control of Ossory. The Norman invasion changed the history of the hill. Richard de Clare, better known as Strongbow, was given Dunamase as part of his dowry for marrying Aoife, the daughter of Diarmuid MacMurrough. Initially, Geoffrey de Constantine was ordered to fortify the site. Shortly afterwards, sometime before 1181, Melier Fitzhenry, one of Strongbow's followers, was granted a castle or ordered to fortify it. He was successful in Ireland and in 1204 would become Justiciar of Ireland. It is not known for certain if he built or strengthened a castle in Dunamase. However, more than likely some sort of fortification, possibly wooden, existed there. Now things get very interesting indeed. As mentioned, Strongbow was given Dunamase, as well as other lands, as part of the dowry for marrying Aoife, the daughter of Diarmuid MacMurrough. Among Strongbow and Aoife's children was Isabella de Clare. She married William Marshal. Dunamase was part of Isabella's dowry. William Marshal was no ordinary noble. At his funeral he was called the greatest knight that ever lived. Recently, I visited Temple Church in London and bought a book about him there. This states that he, quote, became the most powerful man in the kingdom, the hero of Magna Carta and the saviour of England, end quote. The blurb on the back of the book describes him as, quote, one of England's greatest heroes, end quote. He and his son and grandson are buried in Temple Church. This is at the heart of power in England. It has long been linked to the legal profession and remains at the heart of this. However, no one seems to have noted that the Marshals have Gaelic connections. It's worth noting at this stage that Temple Church appears in the book and film of the Da Vinci Code. It plays an important role in the unfolding of the conspiracy at the heart of the plot of the book. A totally fictional one invented in the post-war period by a French writer. The truth is much more interesting, more complex and more exciting. Temple Church was founded by the Knights Templar. It was a refuge for King John during his woes in England. William Marshal and some of his successors, who, as I mentioned, were of Gaelic descent through their mother, are buried there. The church was important in this English Civil War and in the production of Magna Carta in 1215. Dunamase is related to this. Although it had been granted to William Marshal as part of his wife's dowry, the previous lord, Melier Fitzhenry, had refused to hand it over. This led to conflict between the two, which Marshal won. Marshal had a large amount of land in Ireland and spent some time there. However, he is best known for his role in the conflicts in England between King John and his barons. Having been made Earl of Pembroke in 1199, Marshal was central in this confusing conflict, which resulted in the issuing of Magna Carta in 1215. After John's death the following year, Marshal was made guardian of the very young heir to the English crown, Henry III. In this role, he reissued Magna Carta under his own seal in November 1216 and then led the English army to victory at the Battle of Lincoln, bringing to an end the conflict that had begun under King John. After Marshal's death, Dunamase came into the possession of Roger Mortimer after his marriage to Marshal's daughter Maud de Braose around 1247. Maud was an important supporter of Henry III during the Second Barons' War. She even came up with a plan for the escape of Prince Edward after he'd been captured by Simon de Montfort. Moreover, Roger Mortimer killed de Montfort, sending the latter's head and genitals back to Maud as a gift. The grandson of Mortimer and Maud de Braose, Roger Mortimer, would also achieve notoriety. He helped topple Edward II and was blamed by some for the latter's death. Ruling for 4 years or so with Isabella, the wife of Edward II, he was overthrown by Edward III and executed in 1330. His properties were confiscated, with Dunamase becoming a crown property. And some people say the Irish were divided. It is no wonder that the English kingdom in Ireland began to founder. As a result of this conflict and others, the English kingdom in Ireland began to shrink. Shortly after Mortimer's execution, the O'Moores captured Dunamase. Despite its strategic importance, they did not occupy it. Rather, they left it to slowly decline. It was left in this state for a few centuries. As mentioned above, around 1600, changes may have been made in it. I suspect this occurred after the end of the 9 Years' War. However, Dunamase reappears again in the Confederate and Cromwellian Wars, changing sides on numerous occasions. In 1641, it was captured by the insurgents. These were driven out by Charles Coote. Afterwards, it was taken by Thomas Preston, one of his few successors. Then it was recaptured by parliamentarians. In 1646, it was attacked and captured by Eoghan Ruadh O'Neill. After the latter's death, it was occupied by Lord Castlehaven. Then it was surrendered to parliamentarian forces under Colonels Hewson and Reynolds. These two are blamed for its destruction. While they probably did inflict damage on it, so too did the passage of time and neglect. Dunamase is a fascinating place. It is a beautiful, mysterious castle overlooking the Midlands. It is also a place related to some of the most important figures in English and Irish medieval history. These include Strongbow, William Marshal, and Roger Mortimer. In this way, it is tied to Temple Church in London. Unlike the latter, though, it is not involved in historical conspiracies. Maybe Ireland is too peripheral to be involved in these. Yet, the existence of Dunamase Castle and its history point to the fallacy of this type of conspiracy. Real history is complex. Boundaries always get crossed and blurred. William Marshal may have been the greatest English knight that ever lived and may be an important English hero, but his children were also Irish, even Gaelic Irish. This does not appear in the Da Vinci Code or popular histories. It's a pity, since history needs to be portrayed with all its confusions and messes. Come visit the Rock of Dummase. It is a beautiful, evocative place. It is a ruin, but fortunately has escaped the efforts of the late 18th and 19th century lords and elites to rebuild and falsify the past. Like all castles and historic buildings, it existed in a number of phases. Fortunately, attempts to rebuild and falsify it failed. I've mentioned the work of Neil Jackman above. In addition to a written guide to the castle, he has produced, through his Abarta Heritage Group, an excellent audio guide to it, which I recommend listening to before and indeed during any visit. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and if you can support it in any way, all contributions are very welcome.